Hello and welcome to On the Mark Financial Literacy with Mark Zinman. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing the pros and cons of buying versus renting, which is a huge issue among Gen Zers. And we're very excited to say hello to Alicia. Hello.
Hi.
And Mark. Hello.
Hey, Monica. How are you doing?
Good. How are you today?
Doing great.
So far, so good?
So far, so good.
All right. Mark, let's get started. We want to know, how do we know whether someone should buy or whether they should rent? What considerations should they take into account when making that determination?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, there's a lot of factors in buying. The first factor is whether or not you feel like you'll be in, whether or not you feel you'll be in one place. The other thing is whether or not so you can go rent, and the down payment for rent is maybe 1 month or 2 months of security deposit. The down payment for a house could be more than that. I believe you can get into a house for as little as maybe 3%.
Do you recommend that?
If you want to buy a house and you do not have the down payment money, then that's the only way you're going to do it. And what's the cost of? So the normal down payment that banks want is 20%. And you buy a $400,000, I don't know how many people have $80,000 plus closing costs, especially if you're young, saved up. And there's closing costs as well. What are closing costs? Closing costs are like usually a transfer tax. It could be 1%. You should figure 1.5% to 2% of the purchase price from the buyer's point of view being the cost of, in addition to the house. So you buy a house for $400,000, you got to figure it's going to cost you like $440,000. What's in that $40,000? It could be fees, and you're definitely going to have mortgage insurance. You're definitely going to have maybe transfer tax. You're definitely going to have escrows. So what are escrows? Escrows are most banks, when you take mortgages, they create this like pseudo bank account that you're paying into that is 1/12 of what they consider to be the real estate taxes and insurance for the year. So depending on when you buy and depending on what the real estate taxes are due in your state or locality would be how many months they would escrow at one time.
Do you advise buyers to work with their bank and for buyers to pay their property taxes directly to the municipality as opposed to roll it into the escrow account held by the mortgage company?
So that's a great question, and I'll go back to so it all comes down to cost. So most banks charge an extra fee excuse me, onto the mortgage. Like, wait, my mortgage is 6.5%, it'll be 6.75 if I want to escrow. So is it worth that 0.25% to you? I would say most times no. I would say that I have a mortgage, I escrow. I could pay it, but I wasn't going to pay extra money so that I didn't have this account. Also, the down payment is 20%. And what happens if you don't have a 20% down payment? There's something called mortgage insurance. So basically, the mortgage company buys an insurance plan. It's almost like gap insurance for a leased car, right? People might be familiar with that too. That it makes up the difference between what the value is and what you can get out of it. So if you buy a house for $400,000 and put down 3%, that means you have a mortgage of $388,000. Well, we know from day one, I already said it's 1.5% or so. It's more when you sell, because remember, you may have a real estate agent involved, and that could be 3 to 5% depending on what you negotiate with. It's probably going to be at least 4 or 5%, and it's split between the buyer's and seller agent currently. Although that's a different rule and stuff. Yeah, it's a different rule. Yeah, you can negotiate, but let's just say that one seller is going to be 3 to 5%. So there's no way, if you default on that mortgage, that the lender is going to get back their $388. So this mortgage insurance makes that difference up, but it's a fee that's going to be in the mortgage. And so there's several things we do. Number one is that necessarily shouldn't scare you off. We're going to talk about other things too, about renting versus buying, but that doesn't necessarily scare you off. And we advise people that if they're in an area where maybe there's some relatively good growth, after a couple years, let's say that you bought a house for $400,000 and everything's going for $700,000, you can go out a lot of times and hire an appraiser and get an appraisal, submit that to the bank, and as long as your principal now is less than 80% of loan to value is numerator is your mortgage, denominator is the value, then they will remove the mortgage premium insurance.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after a quick break from today's sponsor.
Is your business prepared for today's tech challenges? Managed Services IT has the tools and support you need. From cloud solutions to expert IT support, cybersecurity, and compliance, our Business Cloud bundle keeps your operations running smooth and secure. Whether you're scaling up or locking down, we've got your back, so you can focus on what matters most, growing your business and keeping it safe. Visit ManageServicesIT.com or call 215-355-3997 today. Managed Services IT. Tech that works so you can too.
Okay. And talk about the closing costs, how they may be, rolled into the mortgage. It's not cash that's being provided.
They could. If you're only putting down 3%, you're not going to be able to roll them into mortgage. You need to have something. But listen, you can go in as starter homes. People who are selling starter homes know that they're starter homes. Maybe there's a seller assist that might help you with, they'll give you a $5,000 credit, which, depending on how the mortgage company treats it, may be a way to cover the charges without having to come up with cash. There's some really creative ways. I would advise anyone in the audience who's thinking about it to maybe get a recommendation for a good local real estate agent who works in the neighborhood you want to be in. And, they're not pushy. If you're thinking about buying, they know sometimes people say, think now and then buy for a year or two. You just start that relationship. Maybe they can help you out and tell you what the options are and even guide you like, I know you only have, you need 3% down, you get really close. I tell you, another $10,000 or $15,000 would really be what you need. Mm-hmm. So if you guys can save that, then we could talk. Or I'll look in the meantime. Maybe there's something out there that I didn't know, but they'll give you that kind of advice. And real estate professionals are where we want to. You don't want to buy a house. I don't like buying houses from sell by owner, because you can do that if you know what you're doing. But if you're a young person not knowing, you definitely need to use a licensed real estate agent.
Okay, what other considerations should one take into account when they're making the buy versus rent decision?
Well, the primary one is length of time. The secondary one is cash flow. Okay, so the longer you're going to be in one place, the more apt buying is, and the more you can predict what your life's going to be. I mean, if you say, listen, I'm seeing someone seriously, or I just got married and we're thinking about having children, or I might get married and have children and 5 years is the minimum I'm going to say here, then that needs to affect. You can't go buy a one-bedroom condo when you're going to know you're going to have children. So I'm just making a really, example. You may want to consider if within that short term, and we can talk about that in a minute, but in the short term and long term, you're going to have a child going to school, and then you have to think about the school district. Okay? So there's factors that could factor in to whether you make it. There's tax considerations. Most people are aware that you can deduct your interest and taxes from your interest and taxes you pay on your real estate from your income taxes, and to the extent that you get a benefit out of that. So let's say, for example, that you can deduct $10,000 and you're in a 24% tax bracket. Well, it means you save $2,400, or your mortgage is really $200 a month less than it is, and you can factor that into your cash flow and budgeting and deciding when to get a house or not.
So sometimes a young professional, they're just starting out, they don't have a lot of money in savings, and they just feel like they cannot afford even a small down payment at this time, let alone something closer to the 20%. And so short term, it's a more viable choice for them to rent. So what we want to talk about is, how long should short term last?
I'm going to say this: 5 years or more is not short term. Okay. So it doesn't mean that if you think that you are going to be somewhere for 5 years that you rent or buy. It's just that if you know for a fact that you're going to be there less than 5 years, and unless your company maybe pays for relocation or something like that, which may reduce the cost of living, then I would not recommend buying. Further, if you're moving into a new area, and this is just more common sense than it is financial, but if you're not exactly sure of the area, you want to rent first, even if you plan on being there long term, because you may not know the neighborhood well enough, and you may not know what your normal commute's going to be for your shopping and your doctors, and because you have to establish that. So I would never rush to buy something. But let's say you're in an area and you're in your hometown and you get a job, you graduate and you get a job, and it's in some suburb or city near where your family is or where you grew up, and you know that you're going to stay in that profession and it's not a transient profession, and you know that your situation, you're going to be able to buy I'm going to buy a 3-bedroom townhouse, I'm going to buy a 2-bedroom condo, something that you know you can grow into, because you're going to be subject to the market conditions and selling. So right now interest rates are high. So if I was to sell my house now and you, Monica, were to buy it from me, your mortgage rate is going to be higher than mine because I bought mine 4 or 5 years ago when mortgage rates were 3%. So even if I sold you my house for the same price I paid it, you're going to pay, if you have $100,000 times 4%, that's $4,000 more a year in interest on the same loan. So that affects it as well. So tax benefits, a length of time you're going to be there. A house is a hedge against inflation, okay? If you rent, your landlord's going to raise the rent maybe every year, and there's no cap. A house, if you think about it, there's only there's two numbers that change on your house. So once you buy a house, your mortgage in principal never change if you get a for 30 years.
If you have a 30-year fixed, right? So maybe we could talk a little bit about what those options are beyond a 30-year fixed, but let's continue where you are now.
Okay, well, since we brought it up, so the granddaddy of mortgages is a 30-year fixed mortgage, right? But there's all kinds of other ones. There's a 15-year mortgage. So 15 and 30 would be, there's a variable rate mortgage where you can get a variable rate, and we'll talk about that in a second. There are so there's variable rates. There's something called a 525, which is a variable rate. A 723 is a variable rate. And I'll explain what that is. What's a variable rate? A variable rate means it's not going to be the same for the whole length of the term. So you go and get a 30-year conventional mortgage or a 30-year, 15-year mortgage, and they give you an interest rate, and you settle at that interest rate, it's never going to change unless you refinance or sell, okay? Let's say you're buying a house right now, and this is something you talk to a professional, but you think, well, 7% is really high. I really feel everything I know and research and people tell me that interest rates are going to go down, or maybe it'll be 5% in a couple of years, okay? Then maybe you don't want to lock yourself into a 7% mortgage, but maybe you want to lock yourself into a variable mortgage or a term mortgage. So a variable rate mortgage is one where it usually starts out lower, and then it's tied to an index. It could be the prime rate, it could be the Fed's fund, it could be a bunch of stuff, but it's tied into a rate that's like arm's length. It's not an arbitrary. It's published, and everybody knows what that rate is. And so once a year, it would reset. It would be a certain index plus to get to the number. So maybe like if it was Fed funds, maybe Fed funds are like 4%. Maybe it's Fed funds plus 1%, so it's 5%, right? Next year, Fed funds are 5%. It could go up to 6%. So the way those usually work is that they have a limit on how much they can go up in a year. A lot of times it's 1 or 2%. And they have a lifetime cap that can only go up or down a certain amount. They've changed over, and you want to make sure you understand those terms. Like if you end up with a starting rate of 5%, and why would you go on a variable rate? For two reasons. One is that it's always cheaper. And why is it cheaper? Because I'm lending you money, and I'm guaranteeing you the rate no matter what for 30 years. Or I'm lending you money, and I'm guaranteeing the rate for 1 year, which is more risk to me, the lender, the 30 years. So I'm willing to give you a lower rate because I can change the rate, okay? And the other two are a 525 and a 723. They're also, so most of these mortgages, even if they're variable, are based on a 30-year amortization, meaning that had the mortgage continued at the same rate and you made the same payment for all 30 years, you'd own the house and be paid off, okay? What's a 525 and a 723? If you add those numbers together, they add up to 30, right? So 5 plus 25 is 30, 7 plus 23 is 30. They're guaranteeing a fixed rate for 5 or 7 years, and then it becomes variable. So you either have a 1-year adjustable, a 5-year adjustable, or a 7-year adjustable. And the longer you want that rate to be guaranteed, the higher the rate, okay?
And at some point, someone may see that they have, let's say they have a 30-year fixed, and they see that the rate's gone down, and so they think about refinancing. When they refinance, of course, they're going to have closing costs again. So at what point would you recommend to a client or to an individual that they consider refinancing?
This is another one that always gets me, because let's say that you're in a house for 30 years, you have a 30-year mortgage, and you're in the house for 5 years, and now somebody wants to refinance it, and your payment's going to drop $300 a month. Oh my God, it's amazing. You're going to reset the 30 years again. So what people tend to forget, and what mortgage, unfortunately, it's not unscrupulous per se, it's just perception. They don't necessarily explain what they're not in the business of, if you think you're going to save $300 a month, they're making money by doing the mortgage. They're not misleading you, but they also don't explain that, well, out of the 300, 150 is what you actually save and the principal. So what I tell clients is, if you are going to refinance, you would take the difference between the rate you have now and the rate you have. So let's say $100,000 mortgage, I have a 7% mortgage and a 5% mortgage. Now I can go to 5%. So I will save $2,000 a year. Now I figure out what the closing costs to refinance. I divide that by how many months it's going to take me to make up the money I'm going to pay for the refinancing. And usually it should be 2 years or less.
Okay.
And usually the difference is historically 1.5% fall to make it worthwhile. Okay. But caveats in that, because like if interest rates are falling and you think they're going to fall further, you'd wait because you needed to go another 1 or 1.5 to go down. On the other hand, you can't cry over spilled milk. You don't want to say, oh, it's 5%. It's going to go to 4. It's going to go to 4, and it goes to 6, and you miss out. So, whatever decision you make is the right one.
And I know, if I'm not mistaken, that you feel very strongly about making extra principal payments. So at the beginning of a mortgage, if a greater percentage of the payment is going to interest versus principal, and then that changes over time, why don't you share some of the advice that you've given to your clients about whether or not to make an extra mortgage?
Well, that's another one. So a lot of times you'll go to closing, and they give you this amortization schedule, and you have like a $300,000 or $400,000 mortgage, and it says you're going to pay $6 trillion in interest in over 30 years, and you're like, oh my God.
That's
and then they say there's all kinds of like conventions, like if I pay my month mortgage payment and next month's principal, I'll be halving the mortgage, right? Because my mortgage payment will go every month and I'll be halving it. But what people are forgetting is, yes, you're saving your 5%, but what are you losing? So I am not, so historically, and it's still the same right now, the cheapest interest rate you're going to pay at any point in time is going to be on a primary principal residence. So therefore, if that's the cheapest, then what can you do with this extra money that you don't put? And I always say cash is king, right? Let's say that you have a $300,000 mortgage and you have $300,000 in the bank. Well, I got $300,000 in the bank and I can pay it off. Is it worth it? Well, you can you can get up any day of the week and pay your mortgage off, but you can't get up every day of the week and take out the $300,000. An example I always like to use is, you can't chisel a brick out of your house and go to the supermarket and buy groceries, right?
Liquidity. You're talking about liquidity.
I'm talking about liquidity and the fact that, think about it this way. I mean, this is more my personal belief. So we were talking about renting versus buying, right? So my rent's $3,000 a month, or my mortgage is $3,000 a month. That cost should stay forever. It's a cost of occupancy. So I don't really have and we had talked about renting versus buying. When you buy, the two numbers that never change is principal and interest. So if your principal and interest is $1,500 a month, 28 years from now, it'll still be $1,500 a month. What does that mean? It means that inflation will not affect it. So hopefully you'll make more money each year, you get your 3, 5, whatever your raise is, and you'll have more money, but meanwhile, the principal and interest portion of it will take up less percentage of your income. The only thing that could change is real estate taxes and insurance. But they're a smaller component. So like, I'm just picking, if you have a $1,500 mortgage, maybe you're all in at $2,000. So you're maybe talking about $5,000 or $6,000 of these other costs. So if you apply 3 to 5% to those, it's a much smaller delta than taking the $2,000 and adding to it. So that's one of the advantages of buying, is that you hear people say a house poor. A lot of times young people, and I know my wife and I, when we bought our first house, I needed every last dime to go to settlement. We actually built our first house. It was a townhouse, and back then, this is back maybe 25, 30 years, it was $100,000. And we decided to put all the money into, we put all extras into structural. We didn't upgrade the counters, but we upgraded maybe the floor. Right. Or not the floor, but maybe the ceiling height, 5 foot or something.
9 foot ceiling.
Right, 8, well, something. I don't remember what it all was, but we wanted to add a little bonus room on. That's what you do, because you can always put furniture, you can always put things in, but that's what you call house poor. So when I bought my first house, was also around the same time, and I think this is probably the same for other people, around when I had my first child. They say, new house, new baby is kind of like a saying that has been around. So we went from a 2-income family to a 1.5 to a 1. So it is kind of tough, and there's things you should factor in when thinking about buying a house. When I will say that a lot of women have different opinions on what they want to do about work-wise after they have a baby, and it's more of an emotional thing. Like people say, I want to work full-time, and then after they have a baby, they want to spend more time because they don't want to miss anything. Husbands are the same way too, but it tends to historically be more mothers. So
we talked about in a previous episode, the last episode, we talked about your primary residence, your vacation property, and an investment property that you rent. And so if you are a landlord and you are renting property, you should be, earning revenue on that rental, right? So certainly the school of thought is that if you own your own property, you're not making someone else money, you're investing in yourself. So why is owning a home considered a better investment than renting?
Two factors. Number one is, assume we're going to take them equal, okay? The rent and the mortgage, it's never going to be that way. Usually rents are higher than the mortgage, or it could be lower, all kinds of examples. But let's assume they're the same. A piece of your mortgage is going to pay for the house. It may be small. We mentioned before, at the beginning, you're paying mostly interest and little principal, but every month it goes up a little bit. So you're buying, maybe in the first month it's $100, out of the $1,500, it's $100 or $150, and then, it goes up from there. And by the end, it's probably like $1,450 or $1,475, and it just completely flips around. So our $400,000 house, $388 mortgage, every month that $388 is going down. At the same time, and we talked about the benefit of, I can grow into the payment, right? The payment's really not going to change. And at the same time, you're hoping that $400,000 house appreciates. And if this is a first house and you don't think you'll be there forever, we're here for 5-10 years, we're fine, but eventually we're going to want more land, we're going to want something else. Then what you're hoping is, I really want an $800,000 house. I only can afford a $400,000 house. 5 years from now, they slide, the growth in them slide the same. So basically, the difference between your dream house and your current house is the same dollar delta difference. So maybe $1 million and $600,000, you're still $400,000, right? And as your income goes up, that delta becomes less of a burden because you'll have accumulated with some wealth. Whether that wealth is through savings, increased income, whatever. But you have more opportunity. You have more opportunity in that second house than the first house. Okay. I will say people are really, really, really hot to get their first house. It's really hard to go from house one to house two. I see this in my clients. Like, what's the right decision? Do I really want to invest that much money? So it's not as easy as it was maybe a generation or so. People don't tend to move as much. You see a lot of people who are we had last episode we talked about Terry, was that his name? Okay, 45 years. That's what you saw in a generation. Now, you don't necessarily see that as much.
So I have two last questions for you for today that are somewhat unrelated. Maybe you could, and I'll stack them for you here. Sometimes you hear the term that someone is upside down on their mortgage. Let's talk about what that means and define what that phrase means. And the other question that I wanted to ask you was, a lot of times people who rent don't take out renter's insurance. I'd like to find out what you recommend to your clients.
Okay. So the first one is upside down. Upside down means that your house is worth less than the net amount of money you could take when you sell it. Everyone's upside down. Well, not everyone. Everyone's theoretically upside, especially somebody who, in my example, was $403.88 would be upside down. I already said the closing cost would be more than, assuming you sold the house with the same thing. And we've seen this historically. There was a housing crisis in 2010. You may remember when you were younger or whatever. And at that point in time, what ended up happening was prices kept going up, and all of a sudden we hit a recession where people didn't have the disposable income. So remember, we live in a capitalistic society. So what's a fair market value? What somebody's willing to pay. Mm-hmm. If you can get somebody at the table to pay that, that's the fair market value. When you go to a real estate agent and said we should list the house at $799. There's many people now that are getting $850 is getting $750, and we've gone through a period where their inventory is low and people were overbidding each other, and that's been a problem for young people as well. It's like, I can afford a $350,000 house that then goes for $475. No, I can't. No, my top was maybe $400, and so I keep getting priced out of 5, 6, 7 houses. That is slowing down a bit, but yeah, that's the upside down thing. The upside down is I don't have enough equity in my house to cover if I sold it. So if I wanted to I wanted to trade up, I'd have to bring money to the table. Right. Think about it as, I have a car loan. I want to trade the car in. This is an appreciating asset, right? Car, right? maybe you have to roll some of the principal into the new payment or extend out loan number 2. That's something people, I don't like that either, by the way. That's something, but people go and get 72-month. It's houses and cars are a lot alike. When you walk into a car dealership, they say, well, how much do you want to pay? They never ask you how much you want to spend. They say, well, I want to spend $500 a month. Okay, well, I can give you an 84-month loan. And you see these loans getting longer and longer. So we'll talk, that's a great topic for another episode, but I'm basically saying to my audience, and it goes for the mortgage too, it's the same thing when somebody says, if you refinance the mortgage, you're going to save $400. You're going to save $400 in your payment. You're not going to save $400. It's the same kind of a logic. So people get mesmerized by payments and don't pay attention to principal times rate. And that's in every kind of loan, right? Whether it's a credit card debt, whatever, they're worried about, my monthly payment's $100. Meanwhile, I'm being charged 25% on my credit card. Okay, so yeah, I mean, that's marketing. That's not necessarily, and people fall for that because they hear what they want to hear. They see something, especially with car or house. I see house up, I'm fine with people stretching into a house. I'm not fine with people stretching into a personal asset. Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, if you and yourself or you and your significant other want a home and it's just going to be really tight and you're willing to make the choices, we're not going to eat out, we're going to not buy clothes for 6 months, whatever you need to make in your sacrifice to get in the house, that is usually worth it. That's probably the only time that you could be overextended. Now, when I say overextended, they're not going to give you a mortgage if you exceed certain. You can't like say, I make $100,000, so I'm going to have $100,000 a month payments in my mortgage. No, they limit you. Normally, the debt ratios is no more than 28% of your gross income for a mortgage and 36% for all debt. Okay, so if you have no debt, then yeah, you may be able to go up higher to 33, 36, but if you have, and they're going to count revolving debt, like even if you pay for credit cards, if your monthly payments are $500, that's considered to be, that's your minimum payment, it's considered to be debt. If you have a car payment, that's considered to be debt. You have a school loan, that's considered to be debt. So it's 28 and 36.
Renter's insurance, do you advise?
Oh,
Pay for renter's insurance?
Of course. First of all, renter's insurance is extremely inexpensive. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, you're looking at under $300 in most cases, because when you buy insurance, you own a house, you're buying insurance, you're insuring against somebody stealing it, you're insuring against maybe a tornado, and you're insuring against fire or other kind of damage, for which case you'd have a casualty loss covered by a person. In renter's insurance, all you're insuring is your own personal contents, and maybe some liability. There's a liability component. Like in your car, when you go, people are like, what do you want to get? $200,000 or $500,000 liability protection, right? And they give you choices and the price is different. It's sort of the same thing with renters, but some amount comes so that if somebody your guest comes, you have a guest who comes to your house and they slip on the ice outside, they're going to sue you and the landlord. Having that renter's insurance protects you because you're, more than likely, you're going to need a different lawyer than the landlord because you have a different position. So I think it's very foolish not to have renter's insurance, especially given the cost. It's just, and it goes back to my first episode with my son. Remember when my first episode with my son buying renter's insurance? He willing to do it, couldn't figure out how to write the check and mail it, but he was willing to.
All right. I do have one last question, even though I told you that I wouldn't.
You sound like a client now.
You know, you mentioned a couple things, you know, that, and actually I think it was in the last episode, things that people are used to hearing. And so people will come to you with questions that no longer apply, right? So in that vein, is there ever a time when the equity in your house, do you ever flip to a point where instead you would just recommend paying off the mortgage and taking out the balance and home equity loan?
Great question. Okay. So let's talk about that.
Took me a second to get it out, but you know where.
Yeah, I got it. Okay. The answer is no.
Okay.
And the reason the answer is no is because the most revolving or second mortgages, so you can get, so obviously you buy a house, that's called the primary or first mortgage. Okay. Any other loan you have, one or more, or where your house is collateral, is called a second mortgage. There is no such thing as a third mortgage. You could have 3 mortgages, but that means you have 1 first and 2 seconds. Mm-hmm. Okay? And they're stacked. When I say stacked, whoever records the mortgage first gets paid first. So we talked about being underwater. So you have debt on your house in excess of what its value. Who gets paid first? The first mortgage. If there's more money and you have a second mortgage, that. So until all those creditors that have secured interest are paid off, they have a risk, okay? And obviously the more risk you have, the higher the rate. So a second mortgage or a home equity line or home equity loan would be something that's more risk because the first mortgagee has to be paid off before the second. So the only time that I have ever recommended to a client to pay off their first mortgage and take a second mortgage has been in instances where, and it hasn't happened very often, where the fixed rate is very competitive to the current mortgage rates, and it's a 3 or 5 year term, and they're within that window to pay it off. So it's almost like a refinancing without the costs, okay? The other thing I recommend is, and we talked about chiseling out a brick, right? The largest illiquid asset that anyone has is their house. And why I say it's illiquid? Because you're living there, so you can't liquidate it. But it has a value. So I recommend strongly to clients to have equity. And normally they will give you a home equity line of credit up to 75% of the value of your house. So if you have a house that's worth $500,000, they're going to give you like $400,000 or whatever the 75% is loan minus the first mortgage, right? So, and we talked about this before, and I'm going to probably talk about it in other episodes. I do not like having people leave money in case, okay? You can save, your insurance is due, your vacation rental, you're going on vacation, you have certain things you're putting away for that aren't due in each month. I have no problem with saving up that cash because I know I'm going to spend it on something. But in case the hot water heat, in case the roof goes, in case this is not what we want, because the reason is, and we'll go back to this thing about paying mortgage off. I don't know if I was fully through that whole thought when we talk about prepaying mortgages. I don't want you to make a decision that I'm going to pay an extra $500 to my mortgage or I'm going to go out and spend it on junk, okay? I'm going to go out and do things I wouldn't normally. Savings is savings. It's net equity, right? So if I have $500 that I could either put to my mortgage or put in the bank, if I put it in the bank, I still have the $500. If I spend it on something frivolous or something I didn't need, then I don't have it. So when we talk about not prepaying a mortgage, we're saying not prepaying the payment. I have no problem if you turn around and you put money into a savings account. And I'll give you an example. This is what I've done, and it's not with new buyers, it'll be older people. So a lot of times people are going to their second home. And the question is, I have the cash, so I need a mortgage. Well, again, illiquid asset. I don't want to have a lot of money sitting in a house that I can't touch. So I might say, why don't we get a mortgage for like 50% or 40%? It depends on what the rates are or whatever. But then what do I want them to do with the cash they didn't put down? I want you to put it in an investment account. So I have had clients that they go out and get a $250,000 mortgage and they put $250,000 in a brokerage account that's managed by somebody invested in stock. And then I have them every month, have the broker transfer over the principal and interest on their house, and they make the payment, which includes the taxes and insurance, okay? And then what do? Let's compare how much is left on my house versus how much I have in the bank. And that's where you start to realize that $1 billion of interest you're going to pay over 30 years. Well, you forget, I'm paying, in this case, 7%. It was better when it was 3%, but 7%, but I'm earning 10. So while the numbers are large, there's another side that people don't consider. So that's why I don't like prepaying mortgages. And the same thing is, I don't make money in. The cheapest money, so the second cheapest money to get is probably a home equity line. Why? Because think about personal loans, credit cards are not secured by anything, so like credit cards are very high, or you can go get a personal loan at the bank and it may be less than a credit card, but it's not less than it. So the second cheapest money would be a home equity line of credit. And I don't recommend people putting stuff on homes that aren't related. If you're going to go out and put an addition on your kitchen and you want to get a home equity line of credit, fine, because it's something in the house. You want to go out and pay for your vacation or your car, you don't put that on a home equity line of credit. But what you could do is you could use it as a valve, right? So I had this money over here that I was saving and putting away my $500 every month, and now my roof goes in and it costs me $10,000 to fix my roof. Well, the guy's coming tomorrow and wants a check. Well, you would use the home equity line. Why? Because we all have seen it. The market's up 300 points, down 500 points. So the risk in even long-term investments is selling it without consideration. So pay your 7 or 8%. You're only going to pay 7 or 8% right now on a home equity line of credit, maybe 9%, I don't know what the rates are, based on the number of days you have and how much money you have outstanding. It's not like I take out $10,000, it's 9%, I owe $900. No, it's $900 divided by 365 days. So if you only have it out for a few days, you pay less. In the meantime, not going and liquidating money that may be invested in stocks or mutual funds would, until a good day, would be the right way to do it. My example about the investment manager who you keep an equal amount of thing and they send you the principal and interest, they know ahead of time to do that. Same thing with people who may be taking retirement distributions, they know ahead of time. So those people, when I say those people, your investment advisor is probably factoring in that they need money on the first of the month, and they're figuring out a day maybe around the 15th or 20th to liquidate something and hold it in the money market until they get the money out to you. They're not selling that investment on the same day they're sending you money. They're doing the same thing I said. So you would use the home equity loan to make your illiquid house more liquid instead of like maybe having credit card debt. Maybe you have a bad month where you have paid credit card. Well, then the first thing to do is pay off the credit. It's better to pay off the credit card, but then we don't want to keep using the home as a revolving credit. We want to pay that off or have a plan to pay it off.
Thank you, and we hope everyone continues tuning in for bonus content at the end of this episode. In the meantime, thank you again, Mark, for your insight on the pros and cons of renting versus buying, and we thank Managed Services IT for sponsoring today's episode. We look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. Again, stay with us for some bonus content. Mark? A lot of people are asking what the tax rules are going to be after 2025. There's a budget process going on in Congress every day. Can you speak to that?
Yes, this is something that everybody wonders about because they hear bits and pieces on the news, and a lot of times, and this has happened in the past, clients think it's fact. Like, they're going to give me $500 more for kid. When do I get it? Well, it hasn't passed yet. So from the point of view of a professional like me who listens, maybe in your own profession, you listen to certain things going on in trends, I listen to it that year, and until something's passed, it's not passed. But what are we really going through? So the last major tax law we had was during President Trump's first term, and it was in 2018, and it overhauled a lot of taxes. At issue was Congress plays games with the deficit. Okay, so what's the game? They have rules sunset, meaning they go away or revert back at a certain period of time, because then they can have a number, a deficit number or a surplus number that they can predict, and the GAO, who's independent, can say, well, this is going to cost X number of dollars. So that all expires. So it was going to expire regardless of whether Kamala Harris won or whether President Trump won, but now President Trump won, and it's the Republicans and the same people who were in office 7 years ago. So it's more likely that that bill will stay the same than be changed. Now, anytime we start talking about fiscal policy or anything, it has a political component, and I want to explain a political position I have, okay? So take away the people that the talking heads you hear. You take the everyday person who lives there. They may be a registered Democrat or a registered Republican, but in reality, what I often find, and I find this in my clients all the time, is that an issue is associated with a party. And if you took all the colors of the rainbow in paint and put it in a can and mixed it up, you'd have gray. That's what people are. They're gray. If you're pro-choice, you're a Democrat. If you're for small government, you're a Republican, right? So you can just go down all these lists of potential social and political policies, and they have a label. But no, I don't know many people, including clients that are, Trumpers and anti-Trumpers and whatever your political position, who are completely consistent with one side or the other. They're basically mixed. And that's the same thing we have with tax thing. Tax policy has a social component to it. I think that the social component has not been adhered to as much, and we'll get to that in a second. But in reality, we will not know what this bill does until the Senate passes their bill, and then the House and Senate reconcile it, and the president signs it. And quite often, and I'm speaking as an accountant, I send out emails to my clients about upcoming things when I feel comfortable that I have, more likely than not, a better than 50% chance, right? Okay.
And from a tax policy perspective, what do you like and what do you not like?
Well, I'm going to take a higher, so we talked in another episode about housing and buying a house, okay? So taxes for many years have had a social component. Society wants us to have children, so you get a tax credit or a tax deduction for a child. People want you to buy a house. You get a tax deduction for your interest and real estate taxes. The 2018 tax law took a lot of that away, that socialness. Yeah, you still get money for your children, but the value of owning a home has decreased significantly because of the deductions. So in 2018, the standard deduction was like $12,000, and when they did it, they doubled it. So it was 12, instead of being 12, it was 24. With inflation, that's up almost $30,000. So when you file your taxes, there's certain limits. So you can only deduct $10,000 of taxes, okay? And that's state, local, and real estate. Let's say you have more than 10, you lose it. That's the SALT thing we hear about. So that's 10. Now I take $30,000, which is my itemized deduction, I subtract 10, I'm down to 20. How do I get over 30? Because you're going to get the greater of $30,000 are your actual expenses. Well, that other 20's got to be interest and contributions, because that's the only other two things. And there is a cap. You're only allowed to deduct interest on a principal residence on the first $750,000 of debt. So when it was 3%, it was really hard. It's getting easier to deduct itemized because interest rates are 7%, not because they changed the rule. And so they don't recognize that. So from a tax policy point of view, I think that it should be more representative. I think I have a concern. I think a lot of people and young people have a concern about the deficit. And I would love to see a bill where it really doesn't, whatever the changes are, doesn't affect people who are middle class, maybe 250, 300, whatever you consider. I hate that word middle class because everybody thinks they're middle class when they make $1 million and they make $10, you know. No, and they're the poor or middle class. Nobody's wealthy. So whatever the definition of middle class, and Congress can define it, that those people don't suffer at all. But I do believe like we should go back to the 39.6. Somehow we can't have this current budget is going to put us in a $2.5 trillion deficit. And there are a lot of Republicans, there's a lot of Democrats, obviously, but there are Republicans, and that's why currently there's doubt whether what will pass, because it could cut, they're funding it by cutting Medicare or whatever other social programs they're talking about. And I think tax policy has to represent social policy. And from an overall point of view, you can see it now, right? So when the Democrats were in, we had a lot of credits for solar and stuff. Now you see the Republicans. That's a political difference. And 3 years from now, we may or may not have another Republican, or we might have a Democratic president. So that changes all the time. But tax laws take very hard. Congress has a hard time agreeing on anything. So that's why it's so important, because once you do it, it's going to be hard to change it. So yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I think that people should reach out, especially during this budgetary process, if they feel strongly about something, contact a representative and tell them how they feel. They do listen to that, but don't just be there and take it. You can be proactive. I think people should read up on it. I think people should make their own decisions based on many different news sources, the ones that are pro a certain position and the ones that are anti, so they can sort of make their own decision. I think it's really important for young people. I think young people especially get their news from different sources than maybe their parents did. And sometimes those sources may not be as authoritative as they think they are. So they may not be wrong, but you hear it all the time that when there was newspapers, there was these journalism, there's editors, whatever. Now anybody can have a blog, right? And you can pick it up on your social media, and that blog may or may not be peer reviewed. Mm-hmm. So I'm just saying people should really make their own decision based upon their own investigation of these things. But from a point of view of taxes, I think that most people can assume that their taxes in 2026 will be very similar to 2025. I don't see with a Republican president and Republican Congress that they're going to significantly change the bill. If it was a Democrat, yes, because they're going to want to put their own stamp on it. But since this was President Trump's own bill, I think that the new bill may have changed, but it will be reflective of the sort of the same positions.
All content provided on this podcast is for informational purposes only. No representations are made as to the accuracy or completeness of information that is presented. On the Mark, its owners, collaborators, and guests will not be liable for any errors or omissions, nor for any losses, injuries, or damages from the use of this information.